own constituents who know best, who may not understand the importance of these kinds of issues?
Do what you're doing. I mean, the only thing I would say though is that when you have a petition online, even though the petition is done under the the rules of petitions as per the clerk of the House of Commons and the Senate, it doesn't have the impact of tabling it in the House, putting down a piece of paper with all these things, getting the MP who gets the petitions gets to stand up and speak to it. It goes into Hansard. Online petitions tend not to do the same thing. It doesn't go into Hansard. It's there, it's collected by the clerk, but it doesn't go into Hansard. So going into Hansard is one thing. It puts it down on paper in the historical archives of the House of Commons. But I have to tell you a trick that I learned when we were doing gay rights and same-sex LGBT rights when I was in government and the Chrétien government. When you write a letter and you put it in an envelope, you don't have to stamp it because it goes to the House of Commons free of postal charge, and you seal it. Versus when you take a little card that says stop, or stop online surveillance, kaboom. Everyone gets the stop online surveillance, they see what it is, it goes in the garbage. Somebody's staffer has to open a letter. Do you have any idea how much time that takes? How that staffer doesn't have the ability to do any other work? How that bombards the Prime Minister's office or the Minister's office and they don't know what to do with 300 sealed letters, because they don't know what's in it, right? It just says to the member on the front, and they don't know, they've got to open it. And that really does create stress and staffing problems within the office. And that is something to do. It's not a social media initiative, but I mean, I think with social media, you just have to keep doing what you're doing. Telling the stories, going out there, giving people informed, keeping them aware of what's going on, and that's a good thing. But if you really wanted to cause trouble, the old-fashioned mail, snail mail, is trouble.
You heard it here first. Well, I would say that you guys have been doing a really good job, and I think that the level of awareness overall about the issue is actually quite high because of that. I mean, you think about some of these bills, some of them very technical and complex, and you kind of have to wade through them. So the fact that there are kind of grassroots popular campaigns underway where there's hundreds of thousands of people who kind of get it, they know what it is, what the change is. I mean, I think you're more than halfway there. What I would say, a slightly different answer from HEDY. I think that on campaigns sometimes people really target the government, and I think what you have to do is really have a targeted campaign where you get through to the regular members of Parliament, and you have to be. I mean, there's 308 MPs. That includes the cabinet. And you have to be really targeted to think about who you're going to target in terms of whether it's in BC or elsewhere across the country. Because, in some ways, the biggest politics that goes on is not what you see in the House. It's actually within our caucuses. We all meet every Wednesday. And it's when we're raising the issues in our caucus that things begin to change. So I would even forget about the cabinet ministers and people like that. But when you're getting through to, ex-MP from Vancouver Island North or Prince George or Port Coquitlam or whatever it is, particularly if you've targeted who it is you think is influential in a particular region or area, when you begin to make some progress with those individuals and they start raising it internally and saying, hey, look, I'm getting a lot of stuff on this, that's when I think you begin to see a shift. And it's a very systematic, methodical way of working, but it can be done. And we've seen it done on some issues. I'll give you one example. There was a bill that was going to regulate natural health products. Actually, Tony Clement was the Minister of Health at the time, and there was a huge pushback on it. They had to drop the bill at the end. This was a Conservative bill, because their own members were beginning to be convinced that it was a bad bill, because they had heard from their constituents, and they realized that it was beyond sort of a partisan political approach. And I think if you can hit that level, which I think you guys are doing already, actually you're well on your way to doing that, so you're definitely on the right track. But maybe you've got to be a little more targeted in some of the MPs that you're trying to deal with in each party. And I really feel like that has an impact. It's not always so easy to see, but it definitely is there, and it's definitely something that will cause you know, a qualitative change in terms of how the issue is being viewed.
I'm dying to ask you if they should get letters or postcards, but I won't let you incriminate yourself.
I mean, no, all levels. I mean, some people love to write long handwritten letters, but I would say if you're on social media, like, go for it. Like, most MPs are paying attention to social media. You know, like, we don't, you know, we are actually part of the modern day age too. So, you know, not all, but most MPs are paying attention to that from their constituents, whether it's email. Probably 90% of our response comes through email. But social media, I believe anyway, is critically important because you create that kind of buzz and momentum, and because it's the ability to have an instant response, to have back and forth, right? That makes it very dynamic, and it means that you're right on what's going on, and so I think it's a very important tool.
Okay, last question from the gentleman in the government in waiting t-shirt. I'd invite you to the mic.
Okay, thank you guys. So I have one question. Before you guys said about women and the politicals, and my question is that the Canada is a multicultural country, and every year has so many immigration to come to Canada. So how about the new immigrations to join the politicals and join the social media? And how about them use the social media to pay attention to their prominence? And the second question is that, do you two guys think the MP and MLA should use the social media to connect with the peoples and affect the people's opinions and use the social media as a tool to improve the Democrats and you guys practice the effect? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I think two questions. One is around using social media to engage new immigrants in the political process and public policy discussions, and then maybe a yes or no on whether or not MP MLAs should use social media to connect with constituents.
Well, I guess I could go first. I mean, I think the way we relate and interact with our constituents, you got to do it on a whole variety of ways in terms of where people are at, and certainly social media in terms of people who are new to Canada. I mean, there are people on social media, but there's got to be other ways as well in terms of connecting with people. So, I mean, I think that's something that we do all the time. Like, I do traveling community offices where I go meet people in different neighborhoods at a public library or at a neighborhood house and meet new people. And maybe because of that, I find out that they are on social media, and then I can start following them. And in terms of members of parliament using, or MLAs or city councillors, I mean, just in the civic election here, Andrea, you're really big on social media. I mean, we all use it. It's a fantastic way to communicate. But the key thing is communicate. It's not, to me, it's not a one-way street. If politicians think it's just a way of selling another message, then they haven't understood what it's about. It's actually a way of responding to people. You can actually say a lot in 140 characters. You can have a lot of back and forth. So I really enjoy it. I find it one of the most kind of engaging and interesting ways of having conversations with people, and I learn a lot. I learn what's going on, and so I rely on it a lot.
And in terms of new immigrants, Libby, I'm assuming that your comments included.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Dr. Fry, you get the second last word next to me.
I think that it is a good way to impact or to reach immigrants and to talk with them and to have an interaction discussion. However, there is always that very practical thing. If you talk about new immigrants who came in here because they passed the English and French as a first and second language test and they got in, but their families sometimes, their grandparents, the parents, etc., don't speak English or French. And the trick would be, how do you connect with them in their language, which I'm afraid I am not fluent in many of them. So then what you do is you lose the thing because you get somebody to do your social media for you, and then it's not really you going back and forth. It's possible, I suppose one could find ways to do that, but I think how do you do it on a BlackBerry when I don't know about the Chinese characters and about the Punjabi characters on my BlackBerry, I don't have it. So that's a real problem with the people who don't speak the language. Of course, it's a great way new immigrants who are on, you know, and in social media will pick it up immediately. It's a good way to contact, as Libby just said, and to communicate with your constituents. I tweet all the time, and I blog occasionally when I can't get it in 140 characters. But I think that the point about it is that there has to be an interaction, as Libby said. There's got to be some way that you get feedback and you respond to the feedback, etc. I would say that most 90% of people that feedback on my social media are supportive, and then there is the 10% who aren't, and those are the ones I like to interact with. We get a little debate going on there. But I also think that online, and I know the Liberal Party has something called liberal.ca online, where they float public policy issues, and they hope to have a discussion on it that people can feed in, not necessarily agreeing, disagreeing, adding pieces, taking out pieces, but to have an online discourse. I think that that's really important, not just in terms of getting by on the day-to-day, but in terms of being able to build good public policy and getting it from a diversity of people across the country. What is it they really think we should be doing about certain issues, or to even bring up issues that perhaps the political party isn't even thinking about as an issue. So it's a good way to do that, and I think that's something that we should do. I think social media, of course, has changed the world for us.
Can I just make, I said earlier that I think we all should support independent media, and I neglected to add Co-op Radio, which I remember. So thank you to Co-op Radio for being here today. Very important part of independent media.
Thank you. So, just in closing today, we're going to thank our panelists in a minute, but I wanted to ask you guys a question. How many of you use the internet today? Maybe a better question is how many of you didn't use the internet today? Okay, so for most of you, this is very directly important, but I would argue it's important indirectly for all of us, the issues that we're discussing at Media Democracy Day. In summary of what we heard today, I wanted to thank the libraries, Sylvia, for coming up. When I first started on the Open Data Project at the City of Vancouver, so many people said to me, it's impossible, nobody's ever done it before, blah, blah, blah. And I would say, well, what about a library? Like, we've had open data in our Western societies for a very long time, and important to remember that all of the work we're doing online is rooted in a very positive and understandable experience in our libraries. We heard about antitrust laws. I'd really encourage you to learn more about them and to become an advocate of them. Somebody said, and I think it was Hedy, all of us need to be friends with CBC, and Libby added in that CBC needs to be friends with us by having a structure that allows the public to oversee it. Independent media, absolutely critical. I'm going to guess most of you are already members or participate in some way in independent media, but if you do not, I would really encourage you to do it. Also, the number one thing, in my opinion, that you can do, and it made a big difference in my ability to advocate effectively on these issues, is to join openmedia.ca. If you're not already on their mailing list, they are bringing up very topical, timely issues. On the final word on does it all matter, should you send letters that are sealed or postcards or all of that, for about 20 years, the last 10 of which I was executive director, I ran an organization called the Wilderness Committee, which largest membership-based environmental organization in Canada, and worked to protect biodiversity, so forests, fish, owls, whales, you name it. And one day I came across one of our volunteers who was very upset, who said, you know, this thing got approved, we'll never stop it, you know, and I'm like, you know, we never once in 20 years, never once won a campaign until after the government had approved logging it, mining it, trashing it. So to me, that was just a sign that we were well on our way to victory. So it is never too late to get involved in a campaign. Next week we have the CRTC coming down on usage-based billing. Very important decision to watch. Many policies, as you've heard, that are before the House, so absolutely get involved and add your own voice to it. I really want to thank, we thanked Elizabeth already, but I also wanted to thank HEDY FRY and Libby Davies for being with us for a big chunk of time this afternoon. Because I know know how difficult it is to take time out of an election campaign, is Ellen Woodsworth, who's also a candidate running, who joined us today. Thanks, Ellen.
One quick thing, Andrea, I know we didn't say it, but please support your community newspapers because they're not getting very much more funding from the government anymore.
Okay, she got the last word. 4:15, Building Media Democracy Plenary. I hope